Yeah, I think Helen is there. Yeah, people are hearing us. Tanya, it's okay.
Okay.
Yep, I think everybody's in. While we're waiting, Frank, we'll kick off with you now in a couple of minutes. Let's give everybody a chance because I think we are running over late, so people can get their cup of tea and everything. Gavin, was there any questions that have come up earlier on that we can cover now?
Yeah, there was one around, can you output the transformation steps into a Word document for people to review on SharePoint? Not easily, unfortunately. I know the SAFE have been talking about this and it comes up every year. And they are looking at how they can start to publish the steps up. You can do some things like you can read the workspace and you can do summary reports on what's contained in a workspace, but there's not an easy way to grab the workflow process itself out into something graphical you could put into a Word document, for example. We'd probably always say from a best practice point of view, obviously, if you describe the workflow, bookmarks, annotation, and things would be the best way to do it. Certainly, probably, if you wanted to put it into a Word document, you could take the screenshots, put them into a folder, and FME can build you a standardized template into your Word document. So it could take those images, read them in, put them into a Word document for you, and then upload that to SharePoint. But you'd have to probably do that manual step at the start. There is a review mode in FME, so if you bookmark it and you go to the toolbar, you can turn on like a step through mode and it will step you bookmark to bookmark. So again, if you want to walk somebody through a particular process, that can work quite well. It just means your bookmarks have to follow a logical order. So if you name them something like 1, 1.1, 1.2, 2, 2.2, 2.3, and so on, that can work quite well from a descriptive point of view. But yeah, having a nice sort of print option to get the whole of the workspace captured, I think it's on SAFE's to-do list, and they certainly know people have been asking for it. But yeah, it's not there yet, unfortunately.
Okay, and one other question here. When you write out a map image to Teams, is it presented through the likes of Google Maps, or do viewers need to have a GIS software installed? I think it's
that sort of it depends answer. So you've got options to create a link that would jump you to Google Maps or to any other online mapping platform that could take a URL kind of approach. You could link obviously out to ArcGIS Online, jump out to an ArcGIS Online map, Map Enterprise map, or you could actually turn the map into a raster image and then send the raster image up and then be able to, they'll be able to see that kind of snapshot. But Teams is probably better suited, I guess, for a link to something to visualize. It's about saying something's here, have a look, probably rather than maybe actually sending a map itself. But there's certainly nothing stopping you, like we've done with a couple of customers, sticking it on OneDrive and then sending as a PDF, for example, and then sending a link to that file that they can click on to OneDrive and then be able to open it straight away. So you can share it more directly like that. Similar to the SharePoint example.
Yes, definitely. Another question here. When you update a layer in ArcGIS Online using FME, do the columns of the FME and ArcGIS Online layers have to be the same? Well, I think that's part of the Workbench, isn't it?
Yeah, so we control by the Workbench. They don't have to be the same, but obviously only the attributes that are present on the writer will be the ones that get written out. So they're the ones that are honored. So if you have differences, you just have to do schema mapping between the input to the output. So obviously that's fairly bread and butter for FME. You just say, well, if I've got these attributes, if it's named differently on your source to the destination, we can obviously map that across, or we can create new attributes to populate that process. So it can cope with the differences. If there was one though that was missing from the destination, obviously that wouldn't get carried across. But you can do things like if you need to update the schema, you can drop it and recreate it and things. So you've got options around rebuilding the schema and changing it if you need to sort of, somebody's got additional data you want to upload and put through. So yeah, there's a lot you can do in that space.
And last question before we hand over to Frank to give us our presentation. Can you upload zipped spatial data to SharePoint using the SharePoint writer?
Yep, so we use Word just because it was a fairly simple example, and we can obviously show the opening of the Word, but you can upload anything. So as long as it's reasonable file size that will upload on your bandwidth, you just tell FME what you want and it will upload that data. So we've done images, for example, but yeah, zipped shape files would be another good one. Obviously, you've also got the option with the OneDrive connector. So obviously SharePoint talks to OneDrive. You've got options around using that as well for replicating files up.
Okay, great. And I think everybody's back now. I can see the attendees are all back on the line. So I'm going to hand over to Frank. First off, I'd say thanks to Frank for coming on to speak this morning about what Wexford County Council have been doing on the COVID response. And yeah, Frank, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ciaran. Hello, folks. I'm just going to dive in straight away, just in terms of time. This is a summary basically of my presentation, and it's a summary of the process effectively. Obviously, during the COVID lockdown, more than any other local authority, people were frantically trying to pull together a system to go live, and we went live on March 30th. I think we kicked off the process in earnest on the previous Wednesday, and got a call on Saturday saying we're not going live Tuesday, we're going live Monday morning. So you can imagine there was a bit of a scramble to put this together. I had a system previously built for Storm Emma, and I subsequently tweaked that and improved it during some research I had been doing for a master's. And this is the end result. And little did we know after Storm Ophelia, Storm Emma, that we'd have another crisis on our hands. And it was a big one. Different challenge. Before, we were dealing with getting information and disseminating information from the public to staff. This time we were getting information from the public and trying to disseminate it again to the public, albeit volunteer groups. So a different challenge again. So, you know, the call center was put together. We trained 6 or 7 staff initially, thinking this was going to be low level, low volume. You know, we were talking 9 to 5. So that was the early days of it, and trained them in using a map viewer to capture a point on a map based on an air code search and add particular attributes related to it. So I won't delve too much into that, but you know, you can see from the images there, typical drop downs, and then the complaint category is a critical one, where you have your GA, your St. Vincent de Paul, your IFA, the CSU unit, welfare, transport, then, and that fed through using FME server. So the FME server read, there was a Workbench run. We initially decided to run it twice daily, but that subsequently evolved, and I'll get to that later. But the FME server then reads this hosted feature service and extracts the data out based on regions, based on the area that the civil defence cover, that the Meals and Wheels cover, that the GA cover, and output a HTML report via email to the volunteer, the club secretary's phones, the head of the civil defence, the head of the St. Vincent de Paul, etc. And that's the gist of it. And that has been up and running since March 30th. So that's the overview. So I'm conscious, and I have no idea who the audience is, because obviously, there are a lot of names that are not familiar to me. I can imagine there's a fairly strong, Gareth was telling me there's 80% are FME heads. So for those that are not, just to say, rather than using loose terms, what spatial filtering, very quickly, the graph on the right, or the diagram on the right, you get a complaint. We call it a complaint, but it was a request for help, cry for help, if you like, from someone cocooning. They need their shopping collected, they need their prescription. It's categorized as that's a job for the GA volunteers, and the dot is put inside in on the map based on an air code. But if that dot is inside in Parish A, then job 1 in this case, and if there's a second dot inside in that parish, job 2, both get inputted to a HTML report, and it's sent to that secretary of that club in that parish. And likewise, job 3 is a dot inside Parish Boundary B, and that's just what spatial filtering is. And while many here on FME have been using spatial filtering for years, the power of it is massive in this instance. So that's just a quick visual of it. As you can see, there's a dot based on Joe blogs. Obviously, this is fictitious information, my own mobile number, and it's located in that location. And the slide on the right, then you can see the municipal district boundary, and that basically allows us to send the email to info@enniscorthychamber.ie, because that's the person responsible for Meals and Wheels for this whole region. And that's the principle of it effectively. Likewise, the HSE, the district nurses, we did not have district nurse boundaries. So we, in very, very quick discussions with the HSE, who are great, they said, yeah, if you can get us the townland that person lives in, we can allocate the actual request to the appropriate nurse. So that's what we did. Again, a spatial filter on townland. And likewise, the GA, We didn't have GA boundaries, and anyone that knows GA knows that's a contentious issue anyway. Who should be playing for what club? But we hung it off the parish boundaries that we had with the Catholic parish boundary. And even though you might have 3 or 4 clubs in the likes of Wexford Town, you know, inside in that same Catholic parish, we allocated one club as the primary contact, and if they became too busy, they divvied out the work. But there was no complaints. You know, the goodwill by the volunteers of Wexford was phenomenal, and likewise across the country. So that's a typical example there. And this is, you know, Gareth said it's obligatory. So sorry, I'm not. You can relax. I'm not going into the detail of this. There's your full workbench. It looks complicated, but as you all know, once you get the process working for one HTML and for one spatial filter, you're good to go throughout. But the main thing is getting the data and getting that logic sorted in your head. So just, you know, in the more, any time I go to the FME World Tours, I always come away with 2 or 3 nuggets of information. So rather than focusing on the detail of that workbench, I just picked on 2 or 3 new things that were new to me, and kudos to Gavin, who helped me out with this particular piece. Before, if you're filtering based on a boundary, it was straightforward and you sent the email, but we needed to send a HTML filtering a layer that had 51 different Catholic parishes, and make sure the HTML report went to each individual parish based on each individual club secretary's email address. And that's where this piece came into play, where I hadn't previously done this, where you're writing the file to application on the server and it gets attached via email, but it needs to be one per boundary of the 51 boundaries, if that makes any sense. So here's a little bit of detail, but the key piece here, folks, is the feature writer. And I wasn't even aware that was there, and I'm sure others will be smiling saying, yeah, of course it was always there. But you know, the great things are those that are pointed to you when you're under pressure. And the output port, before that was always defaulted to none, but it's sitting down there in the bottom and 1 per feature, and that just ensured that the spatial filter for the 51 parishes ended up with 51 emails if there was 51 points in each boundary, obviously. So that was hugely beneficial, and that was an important one that we got across the line, I think, Gavin, on Saturday night before the March 30th. This is just a typical example of, you know, that's all FME that's doing that. It's coming from the COVID support of Wexford Cocoa, but they're getting a subject line that they know this is from the COVID call center of Wexford Cocoa, and it's for the Meals and Wheels. It's for, you know, because some people would actually be involved in 2 or 3 different volunteer groups. So that's important. So, you know, the visual of that is quite useful for them. They got their email at 1:30, as you can see. Well, the job was run at 1:30, and at 13:31 they would receive the email, and that happened again 5:30 each day. So getting that information out to people was critical. So that's, again, all from FME. That standard text that was built into the FME workbench. So, you know, we kept a generic hello GA volunteer, but obviously this one went to the secretary at St. Mary's Rosslare. And, you know, can you complete the following request? We gave them critical information, and that information changed, and that actual email was in a state of flux as we went through the process and the lockdown. But there's the HTML report attached. As you can see, it's date stamped, and it lists the name of the club as well. So it's just reassurance for us with the early days of QAing that we were getting the right HTML report to the right person. And that's a typical HTML. Now, obviously, if there was more than one job in let's say the parish of Rosslare, they would have got 3 and 4 or 5 rows. But this one, for example, is just an example. That transport one would have gone to the civil defence. And again, the data is fictitious. Obviously, it's my own. But the idea being that there is a Google link. And actually what evolved, even though we were mapping it via air code, I hadn't previously the air code listed inside in the report. And it was interesting feedback. We had Wednesday evening sessions where we had conference call with all the volunteer groups in the council chamber, and the GA came back saying, is there any chance you could add the air code to the HTML? And I'm thinking, should I have the link? Because that's a hyperlink there. If you hover over that, if I click on it now, I'm not sure whether it'll fire if you're or not, but that brings you to your Google map where it's concatenated maps.ie / the Latin, the long. But they wanted to screen grab and cut and paste into WhatsApp. And if they had the air code, then the other volunteers, and I was involved myself on the other side of it, you could search by air code and find the person to deliver the Meals on Wheels or deliver the shopping. And that was just something that happened on the fly, really useful suggestion. And it gets back to, you know, talking to the users and saying, what else, how else can we help you? So there's the job ID, medium, and then the link to Google Map, and that will hopefully fire out. You see if you hover over it, it's jumping to my other screen, so you're probably not going to see that now. I'm not. Can someone tell me if they can see that? Hello?
Yeah, I can see
Yeah, we can see it, Frank. Yeah.
So then you can hit directions and from location, and you get, you know, you can get how to get to the motor tax offices in this case. So that's the just go back to the PowerPoint now. Sorry, guys. Okay, so you know that was all useful, and then we what we did was, you know, some of the staff were so busy taking calls, you know, we felt, are they in a vacuum? Do they know how much they're contributing to this? So I set up a huge TV screen in, we had them set up in the library in the early weeks while we were training them, and set up an operation dashboard. You know, that's from AGOL, but it's splicing and dicing the data. It's a really good visual, but the management were delighted with this as well, because it's a quick visual of the breakdown. And, you know, that gives you a better example of the amount of spatial filtering that FME was doing here. It had to split all those and send them to the right people. And, you know, hugely beneficial. This then, I ran some quality assurance reports, again at 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock, because the management team over the call center wanted to QA, because you know, you have to remember, early days you had some people mapping dots on a map via air code, talking to someone, providing empathy, you know, a caring ear, and they also had to make sure they classified the call properly. So early days, we wanted to make sure no mistakes were made. For example, if someone wanted the shopping collected and it got classified as HSE, you had a HSE district nurse getting a call, and that we didn't want. You know, you had the civil defence being mobilised to transport. So the classification of the call was hugely important. So the QA reporting was sent to the call center 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock, and at 1:30 and 5:30 they had to get that sorted, because the system was sending the emails, and that worked quite well. Shout out to my colleague Mark Mitchell. I was busy on the training of the staff, and Mark went and there was no reporting really set up, because obviously this was pulled together so quickly. So he put a lot of work with FME, and obviously using FME server on the day's end HTML reports sent to the COVID call center management team, the weekly reports, and they're all automatically emailed to the relevant management team and to the call center supervisory staff. So that's a typical example of it. A lot of work involved there. And moving on then, just, you know, dealing with the system as the goalposts move, the ability for our, you know, FME and our in-house skills to be able to deal with this was hugely beneficial. You know, just to go back to, we initially started, you know, 9 to 5, and then it went 8 to 8, Monday to Sunday. So we had to bring 50 different staff and get them trained, 50 more staff, get them all online trained. So there was a challenge there. The library book request came in at a later date, where the library offered books to be delivered to people cocooning. So we had to modify the workbench, you know, save it purely for the library, run a cron to run. They wanted to, you know, get the requests, you know, every 2 hours. So that changed the goalposts a little bit. More volunteer groups coming on stream, personnel changing, such as civil defence needed a break, order them all to kicked in, and vice versa, and likewise Meals and Wheels, you know, club secretaries, all of that. So we were able to change the emailer for the information to be disseminated to the right people at the right time. The Monday we went live, 4 of the IT staff rang 50 different, 60 odd GA clubs, ensuring that the email addresses were correct, because we were getting a few bounce backs. You had all that going on. Obviously, the lack of critical spatial data, because for spatial filtering to work, you know, you need a spatial polygon. Yes, I was getting PDFs with, you know, an arrow to an area for the Meals and Wheels, and fair play to them, that had something, but it was of no use from a spatial filtering point of view. So using the municipal districts, and we have since the community section have put in a process, and we put a map viewer together to allow people to build and select their townlands to build on this Meals and Wheels area, so we have it in the future. Likewise, the HSE, we hung it off the townlands. You know, necessity is the mother of invention. We had to move quickly. The GA areas, again, it would be brilliant to have that, but I think that could be a contentious one. But, you know, having the Catholic parish boundaries was massively beneficial there. Why Cron? Again, nuggets of information. Just, watching Ciaran's presentation there earlier, I'm going, okay, big circle around HTML to PDF transformer. Wasn't aware of that one, because we've done a lot of HTML and we've been requested to do that, and I'm just delighted to hear that, because Gavin had told me there was a bit of a learning curve of getting that PDF to work. So thrilled with that. So again, with that in mind, I want to throw a few nuggets at a few people. Why Cron hadn't really needed to use it before. A shout out to Siobhan Redmond, a colleague of mine who had previous experience with Cron, and put that together for me really quickly, where for the libraries needed the 11, 2, 5 and 8 p.m. running of the reports, for example. So they got the list of staff that could give it to their people, put the books together, get it delivered to those that are cocooning. The job ID, well, why is that so important? Previously, I'd planned that on the half 1 and half 5 job run, the job ID would get generated from the object ID so that we could reference that. But it was quickly apparent that this wasn't early enough for people as they liaise to and fro between volunteers over the phone, or if there was an issue. So I needed to run that every 10 minutes. So that was putting, so our FME cloud server dealt with that every 10 minutes. So the object ID got copied to the job ID, and that got populated. So people could then go back in 10 minutes later, go, okay, my job ID for that particular request is 1, 2, 3, 4. And they were able to search on the map viewer in the future on that. There's an interesting link there, free formatter for Cron, might be of use to people. I assume the lads will be sharing the slides afterwards. So challenges and solutions. Again, we mentioned the moving of goalposts, but the training of the cohort, from March 30th, 40 plus, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. That was pressure, and kudos to Mark for setting up 50 credentials for 50 users very quickly. Well, I tried to train them remotely using Camtasia, using Teams, and some people brought them into the council chamber, spatially distanced, obviously, and relay the information. I think a key piece was setting up a map viewer and allowing them add dots to a map that didn't matter, so that it took the nervousness away from them, so that when they were scheduled to go in and go on the live system, they were confident in using it. So there's your solutions on the right, as I say, and a big solution, all IT staff, getting all those staff to trained and then get them out with a laptop, with a headset, with a softcore phone. And as you all know, all those items were scarce as hen's teeth in April. And kudos to all the IT staff. Kudos to all the staff in the council who showed huge empathy. There was we had large numbers in terms of, ringing back citizens in terms of welfare calls. We offered the citizens of Wexford that were cocooning and some vulnerable adults that we knew about, did they want to get transferred to the brilliant service that is Alone, and they were happy to stay with the people of Wexford that were working in the council, because they built up a rapport with them. Huge. From a system point of view, 1,700 plus emails have automatically been generated. That's all done by FME and FME on-prem and FME cloud. 1,700 plus HTML reports. 600 reports on stats, the 28 weekly, 392 QAs and 196 daily reports. So that's massive heavy lifting and brilliant data dissemination, purely because we had FME. So, that's the COVID element of it. I mentioned to Gavin as well, I gave a presentation on a planning site search process that we put in place last year. And I just think it's interesting to give you some stats on that. Previously, the planning section, because it was a non-statutory requirement, were getting out reports about 200 a year at €100 cost to solicitors, site suitability agents and the like. And since that went live in May of the last FME World Tour, we just had gone live with 4,000 plus planning search reports being generated automatically, 2,500 since last November. So just to give you an idea, for the cloud is paying for itself with the planning site search tool. I reckon about €3 it's costing per report based on the cost of FME Cloud alone. So FME Cloud paid for us to be able to do an awful lot during COVID through the planning site search. So there's a bit of a link up there. It's a slight off topic, but I hope you will entertain me on that one. And that's just to give you an idea. And John spoke about providing services to the public and providing, data to people on demand when they need it. And this is another example of that, really. And, it's interesting to see during lockdown, look at April 2020, May, June, where we had people using that system and getting information, where they would probably wouldn't have got any of it because there was so many planning staff working from home at that stage. They probably would have struggled to collate all that and get it out there. So again, useful. And just thanks for listening. And as I say, kudos to all the volunteer groups in Wexford as well. And I suppose I'm just going to play this little bit of lighthearted entertainment, but every time I watch this, I think of FME. And it's kind of a bit of a dance that IT did when we got all this up and running.
Is this your dancing, Frank? Is it?
That's me. That's me. We can kill it at that. But that always reminds me of FME. Funny enough, and we were quite relieved to get all that working. So we'll kill that there. Okay.
In the practice session, Frank, you did the dance. So you're not going to do it for us now? No, okay.
No, Gavin. I can't see screen now, whatever's going on. What do I need to do here? Unshare, is it?
Yeah, just unshare.
Okay. Thanks, Frank. Frank, one question came in there just from Ita. I think it's because of the GA boundaries, but you asked why you use the parish boundary rather than the admin boundary.
Yes. Basically, we didn't have it, and I don't know, do they exist? A parish bound or a GA boundary, and you know yourself, Ciaran, you're involved in the GA. Where you draw that line between Club A and Club B can be a contentious issue. So we luckily had a parish boundary, and it was just I just had to make the call. How are we going to break this up into manageable units? So that's really why we use that. So it was necessity was the mother of invention, and what you had just what you used.
Yeah. Listen, that's just a fantastic use of it just shows what local authorities do for people. I think local government get a lot of abuse at times over things. It's great to see what could be done. Also shows again what the community does. All those volunteers who came out, put their own lives at bit of risk, to be out and about and do these things, but for everybody to come together, and also the speed. You were talking about the 30th of March to have that in place. That was a fantastic achievement. So really well done, and it's a credit to Wexford and to you and the team.
Okay, thanks, Ciaran.
No problem. Thanks, Frank. I think you're still sharing, Frank. So
sorry. Okay.
There we go. That's great. Thanks very much, Frank. Okay. Right. So the next session, I don't think there's any other questions out. No. The next session we're going to have now is we're going to talk about, or Gavin's going to talk about automations, and I'll drive again, Gavin. So let me just bring up the deck, and that's all good for you. And I think you're going to. I'll jump in anyway if where we might have a Garrett, but I'll let you fire off.
Yeah, cool, thank you. No, so this one, just to really walk through a little bit about more what you can do with automations. They're hugely powerful. There is so much you can do with them. And it's really about this shift for FME, for really being more about the enterprise. For years it's been that thing that's been stuck on somebody's desk, translating a little bit of data. Somebody sends a CD in with some data on, you translated it, and it goes out. It's grown, it's got a lot bigger, it can do so much more. And I think server's always been really underutilized by organizations typically, especially with sort of what has now become the automation side of things. You can do the classic read, jump on. It's this very much the merging between what you would do on your desktop and what you now can do with automations and with server. Everybody's always been able to build fantastic workspaces, but server really takes them and makes them available more widely. So it's this kind of harmonization. So, everybody's done that classic, build your workspace. They're hugely powerful. It's still where all the business logic is, but this is where we automate it. This is where we can make it, integrate out to an organization. We can do all these sending the emails that everybody's been talking about. We can do all this kind of sending it to SharePoint and everything. All of this we can start to build into these workflows. It's been in there since day one. We had classic notifications. They are fine. They are very, very powerful. It is what automations are built on. But most people looked at them and just went, I have no idea. And we'd train with people and they would just glaze over. And they'd be like, but there's a topic and a subscriber and this links, and nobody could get their head around it. And once you built a few, you kind of got your head around, but they're not intuitive. Even though there's a lot of power there, they were just very, very complicated. And Safe have likened this to the move from sort of FME core, where you write your own mapping file, to actually having the GUI for desktop, and what everybody would probably see FME desktop as being today. So yeah, they were sadly, they're hugely powerful, but just totally underused. And it is because, you know, they're not user friendly. And it's that classic, if it's not user friendly, nobody's going to use it. But so all they are really is the ability to run a workspace. So if you think of a schedule, you know, that is now an automation. So schedules are moving into automations. They're still staying there, so the existing ones will not go anywhere anytime soon. But it's now become an automation trigger. You can listen to emails. We can listen to different file folders being updated. We can listen to webhooks and things coming in. There's a whole number of these triggers we can fire, and then they trigger the actions. And that's typically going to be running workspaces in FME's kind of world. So we can run these, and then we can chain them together to have different things happen. So this is one from one of the earlier ones. You know, we have that schedule. We can run that when we need it to. It runs the workspaces. You know, that will do the modeling, and then they send the data to Sisense for their dashboarding. They can send it out to those work order systems. You know, we can build those through, and that's really all the automations are. Okay. So just to take you through the process for those who've not seen it, and if you've not tried FME Server, you know, reach out to Garrett. I'd really recommend it. There's so much capability in it now. It can do so much. So we can come in, we can click on the manage automations, we get a default trigger, and then you can see the different types of trigger actions. So there's a whole bunch of cloud ones. If you're doing anything on Amazon or Azure Cloud, there's some really neat ones up there. There's directory modification. A new file appears in a directory, a new email arrives in an inbox. You know, we can respond to that. Sort of classic FME servers, FTP, JMS is the some indoor messaging or messaging internally. And we'll come back to the schedule, and at the bottom there, you've got the webhook. So there's a huge range. Now, we're going to use schedule because that's probably one of the most common for FME. And you can have a basic schedule, so you can trigger it daily, weekly, any day of the month. I'm going to use the repeat on interval, and you saw the cron, which was what Frank was using earlier. So we've got the different times. We can pick when we want this to trigger. Now, I want this to run overnight. So I'm going to set this to run at 11:30 because I want this process to run, you know, when nobody else is around. And we just apply that. And that's that schedule created. So when it hits the right time, it's just going to fire the schedule. And obviously, we need some actions. So again, just like desktop, you drag it on, connect them all up. I can click in here and then choose what action I want to use. So I can run a workspace. I can run a dynamic workspace. I can do some logs, some filtering and things now as part of this. But, you know, we're just going to run a workspace. So I can choose from my repository what workspace I want to run. Then I need to give it an output, so I can come in here and actually set where this is going to be. So I'm just going to use FME's temp directory to write a Word report to in this case. That can come from the keys we looked at earlier in some of the earlier sessions as well, if you need them to. Then we just need to give it a name so we can save them. I'm never very imaginative when it comes to my names, so this one just ends up being V2. And you can tag them as well, so you can start to search for them. And yeah, that creates a basic automation. Now, we'll always go on about best practice. If we ever do any training, we will explain best practice, and you should bookmark everything and annotate it. So again, just as you would do to describe a workspace, I think, you know, describing your automations now is just as important, because it means when somebody looks at it, they're going to rapidly understand what an automation is trying to do. And that was one of the big challenges with notifications, was you could build a really cool, sophisticated workflow, but there was no way of visualizing it. So somebody would come in, look at the server, and spend ages trying to unpick quite how that would work. You know, here, nice and graphical, and again, bookmark it, a little bit of annotation, all those sort of best practice things we'll bang on about when we talk about desktop, you know, just carry into the schedules with the things as well, the automations as part of this process. You know, put a little bit of annotation in. You can zoom to fit. You know, there's a little grid if you want to toggle the grid on and off to snap to. The auto layout on server is just as bad as the auto layout on desktop. Would always encourage you to probably lay them out yourself, because you're going to make better design decisions than the server ever will. And then we've got options here around viewing the log file, and then we can turn the guides on, which are those little extra bits that pop up, which are a quick way of building a workflow. But they can get in the way when you start trying to lot in, so you may want to turn them off. You know, if I've got a large one, I'll get rid of them. And then we start the automation, and then that actually triggers the automation to listen. And obviously, this isn't going to fire now, which is not very helpful because I don't really want to wait till 11 o'clock at night. But what I can do now is come in and use the trigger option. So that means if I'm developing and testing, I can just come in, trigger that workflow, and it will fire it now immediately for me, so I can check that, is my workspace going to run? Quite often you'll miss something. Something might not be quite set right, so it'll error. So this way you can kind of get all of those errors out and things. But I can come in, I can manage automation, I can look, and for that one I can pick it, and it gives me the automation log. So I can see here that the workspace was fired, that it's successfully completed. If I put a log in, it will give me any of the log options as well. And I can also see the triggered jobs. So you can start to see what jobs have been fired by a particular automation. If somebody has a problem with a particular automation, sometimes AGL doesn't always write, goes out offline. You can start to see where those jobs are listed in there. So you can start to get a very good view for each one. And there we've got our resource folder document at the end. Obviously, can't really view it on the here. So you can come in, just download that. I can view it. So you can view text files and things in FME Server, but if it's a custom format or specific format like that, you can just download it and say it's a really basic report because it's purely to show the functionality. It's not a particularly exciting one. So there's a lot of power there. It's really much, much simpler to use. Everything that was in the notifications is now in automations. So if you're looking at those ones, definitely migrate. We also have webhooks. And these are basically what allow a third party to programmatically run a workspace, or for us to call a third party application.
Sorry.
So Teams, for example, is using the webhook. They're not new. They've appeared and they're branded in 2019, but they've been in there since 2018. The functionality's, or 2008, sorry. The functionality's been in there for a very, very long time. They've just improved it, made it a little bit more intuitive. So here, we can use Survey123. We can come in, we can add a webhook, and all we do in here is put a webhook from FME onto Survey123, and Survey123 then sends us the information. Jump on one slide. So all this is doing, we go on mobile app, we fill out a report. This will go back to obviously AGL, will sit in the AGL platform, you can use it. But obviously what we've done is set up a webhook that sits behind this particular application. And when you hit submit on the application here, that will fire a webhook on Survey123 that sends information about that survey to FME Server. FME Server will listen, it will generate an email to say, well, okay, we have a new incident report, and then send that information to somebody. Or now it could upload to SharePoint. We could generate that report for and then post that to a SharePoint file, for example. Then we potentially send people the link we need to. Video pause, or is it frozen? We can also combine the two. So you have webhooks, we have automations. So you'll have probably seen in the past, we'll have shown you the online mapping portal that we have. That's just taking information and sending that to FME. And obviously that information can now come in through one of these webhooks. So if we jump on one slide, what we can see here is we have that webhook that listens to that map application and then starts to pass that into a workspace. The workspace runs through, it can generate it. If there's an error, it can send an email back to the user to say, oh, thank you very much, but there was a problem with your submission. And we can then pass it down to another part of the workflow that may generate the PDF map, for example. So we can combine these two technologies together. And we can also combine with third-party webhooks. So we don't just have to listen or have information pushed into FME Server. You can also start to push information out to other ones. And that's really how the Teams demos that we've been doing so far work. Jump on one slide. So here we've got our SharePoint connector, and then we have the HTTP caller. So we do all the SharePoint, we upload our data, but obviously then we want to send that message out. So what we can do is we come into the HTTP caller. The HTTP caller will send the message to the webhook. So that's going to include where the document is and where the links are. There we go. So it'll appear on here. So we've got those links, and all that is when it runs through is just the HTTP caller, and it's a bunch of JSON. So if you have our document, if you want to just jump on one slide, and then so what we've got is the HTTP caller at the top there from that previous example. That's what's sending the request. And then we have in the HTTP caller in the bottom there, the JSON that we send. So that's basically for a Microsoft Teams message. There's a standardized JSON syntax it uses. We can create that syntax. We can put the different values we want in. Obviously, we can pick those up from the attributes. So the link to the SharePoint directory, all of those shared files, for example, just go into here. And then you go into Teams on the left there, and you just add a webhook. So you can pick a channel, you add a webhook function to it, and then you create that webhook. And the key bit is that very bottom piece where you have that URL, and that's the Teams webhook you send the information into. So, just the same way we've done it in terms of creating an FME webhook that ArcGIS Survey can send the information into, here we're creating one in Microsoft and Teams and then pushing our content into that via, it's a HTTP post. So you basically take the link, set the HTTP caller to post, push that JSON message across to it, and that's what fires all the Teams integrations and things, or any other application that needs that capability. And obviously then we can embed FME into other applications as well. So we have our asset manager, we can embed FME so that basically that will call FME server and start to return data in. So I say, I'll hand over to one of the sales guys because they can explain this one much better than me.
Oh, you can have me. I'm not sales. So we're showing this is actually our planning data capture workflow. So this is Hexagon's Map Enterprise product. So in it, we have the ability to capture a planning application. So you can see any application on the map. We're able to draw and edit and capture any records we want to see. But actually, once we have a record captured, we're able to create a report that, as Gavin says, is able to then call out to the planning analysis and do the report on the fly. So actually here we have that for their application. It's now created the planning application boundary so that you can actually click on it inside the planning application. And the demo there shows it with an existing polygon. That could also be that you could run that report the minute you capture the polygon. So once you capture the polygon in the map, that you're able to save it to the database and then run the report immediately and call FME as the webhook and being able to go out. So it just shows how now with something like Map Enterprise, which is a great tool for editing, capturing, publishing data, but then being able to expose the really great reporting functionality in FME. And back to you, Gavin.
There you go. And so just to show you how that's created, we just choose the workspace that we need to run it. And then if you come down under the advanced option here, you'll notice just halfway down there, you have that create webhook. So where we probably talked about the server apps before, we now just click on that. That generates a token. So you can give it a name, and I would definitely make these descriptive. You can assign parameters and things, so you can see what information needs to be passed through. And then that's essentially it. You just take that URL there, you paste that into whatever application you need. So in this case, we took that, put it through into the asset monitor, put it into survey 123. You can download them. It's a one-time download, so don't lose the text file. But it will give you all of the information about that. So you have that kind of data there to store and save. So if you need to come back, you need to change a token or link, you know what they are. And then that's essentially it. It's that easy to create them, to process them and build them through. And obviously that now links to that particular workspace. Or you can create them in the desktop product, the automations as well. So you can include them with automations and things. So you'll notice there's an automations webhook. You can pass them through to as well.
Thanks, Gavin. I think we'll keep moving because we're getting tight for time again. I think we have a very full agenda. So this morning we had hoped that Natalia from SIRO would be able to speak about the Duct distance to network project that they've done. Unfortunately, as I said, Natalia can't make it. So I'm just going to give a very brief summary of our understanding of what FME can do for this kind of analysis, and hopefully we might be able to share with you Natalia's presentation in the future. So very quickly and very briefly, what is, when we talk about distance to duct or distance to network requirements, what are they? What's the solution with FME, and what do we output and the benefits? So for utilities, network proposals can be costly and labour intensive to produce. Not all new network connection proposals are ordered. So somebody might look for a new gas pipe or water pipe or telecom, and then get a proposal, put effort into it, and then decide not to go with the company or not to actually build a house or whatever it was. And also then business teams need to be able to easily calculate approximate build costs for new connections, to focus efforts on winnable business, and to quickly no bid or on-off network or commercially unviable proposals. So to make sure that they have the right price for the right quote. So our solution is we use FME to provide a self-service solution to automatically calculate the cost of a new connection from a list of potential customer premises. FME will calculate the lowest cost distance from the customer to the nearest connection point, and the lowest cost path will take into account the existing civil or telecom infrastructure, and can also take into account like the OSI prior to real world features. So then the cost will be calculated using an agreed bill of materials list. So it works out how much of the new network connection can go across existing civil infrastructure, how much maybe has to be dug or overhead, how much has to go around a river or through a marsh or whatever the things are that could be real world, which could have a big impact on the price, and then gives the sales guy or the planner an automated answer to go, okay, this is the cost to build. And if it then goes ahead, they can do a proper full detailed design inside their GIS. And then FME will then, as we've seen this morning, is great at producing these HTML reports, or Excel reports, which has the network features that are going to be in the design, the cost per network feature, the distance, and then being also able to give the sales guys or the network planners a KML map that they can then load in Google Earth or Google Maps and see the proposed route and see all the network to go against it. And again, in the case of SIRO, I believe like there was huge savings in time in that having these records automated, and not having the sales team or the planning team spending a lot of time analyzing network, opening up multiple systems to try and get this information. So very much in line with what John was showing this morning and how they went with the planning, where you got guys analyzing data, analyzing different data sets to come up with the report. We were able to just automate that and produce a single report. And the benefit of that is that solutions can support telecoms to reduce the proposal costs, focus their commercial teams on winnable business, and then decrease the chance of selling commercially unviable connections. You could, again, especially the regulated utility providers who may have to honour a quote or a proposal, they need to know exactly what the kind of cost would be to provide new connectivity, and to make sure that they're measuring that properly. And that was a quick, because we are catching up on time, introduction into what we can do with FME. If I flick back to our solution, we can see that. There was a few questions that we'll take. We're just catching up on time now. One from Justin. I think this is for you, Gavin. How are conflicts dealt with in schedules? For example, two people schedule a job for the same time, or a job's not finished. When is the next one scheduled?
So it's all done via the engines. So there's a queue manager that sits there, and it's determined really by the number of engines you have. So if two people submit a job at the same time, and you have two engines, then the two jobs can run concurrently. And that's really kind of how FME load balances its effort. So every job runs on an engine, and if you have two engines, you can run two jobs concurrently. If you have three engines, you can run three jobs concurrently. So if you had two people submit a job at the same time, or a schedule triggers two workspaces at the same time, but you only have a single engine, one will run, and then the other will sit in a queue. And then when the first one completes, the second one will complete. So depending on the business problem you're trying to solve, you architect every server to fit that scenario. So it might be that you want slightly more engines, or it might be you're happy with the queue time, so therefore you can get away with the queue time. We tend to find real-time transactions need the more engines, and the sort of more ETL tasks can queue. And FME 2020 has a new dynamic engines concept that helps balance that, so you can burst the number of engines that you need. So if you want more load, you can burst it out, and that will manage the engines.
Okay. FME, GN, are webhooks available in desktop? Can you call the webhooks from desktop or create them?
You can call webhooks. So the HTTP call up, like the Teams example, calls an external one. You can't listen to them. So you can call out to a webhook, but FME server, say like I just survey 123 example, that can't talk to certain desktop. So you need to have server for that one. But if you wanted to call Teams, for example, then you can do it through the desktop application. So it just kind of depends. But yeah, they're a lot more powerful on server overall than they would be with desktop.
Okay, and there's a question from Jason on are notifications, automations in desktop.
So
No, that's
all of
server.
that is server. You can interact with them from desktop. So desktop can call automations. It can call bits of the notification platform. And quite often the workflow will do that. You know, you'll build bits in a desktop, in a workspace that will call them. But yeah, you have to have server to make that work, which is why the two products really are becoming much more integrated, like you say, for the enterprise. It's no longer just get desktop or maybe server if you want to run some schedules. It's a much more combined entity.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions that I can see at the minute. So guys, I think we're catching up, we're getting there. We're going to take a couple of minutes break. So the final session will start at 12:30. I'd like again, once again, thank Frank for his excellent presentation this morning. I think it was really good, and hope you all can come back for the last session. It's only, I think we have Jorge from Dublin Airport, and then prizes and wrap up and everything. So hopefully we'll see you again in a few minutes. Thanks.